debating sharing this story for some time, mostly because it doesn't have a lot of clarity. Something definitely happened. What exactly it was, I don't know. So let me set the stage. At the time, I was living in Traverse City, Michigan. Beautiful landscapes for those wondering. Huge glacier-carved hills, and Lake Michigan at your back. I rented a little townhouse with a longtime friend a little ways outside the city. I'd just gotten a hold of my old bicycle, which I had shipped up from my old hometown, and was raring to start riding around. And that's how it all got started. It was my day off, and I decided to save gas and ride my bike into town. I geared up, checked my tires, and roared off. I'd been big on riding my bike once upon a time, and I came back riding a bike. What I didn't notice, however, was how quickly I was moving. If I'd been paying attention, I would have realized the constant downward slope that I was on, and how biking back up it would likely pose a difficulty for my winter-lapsed muscles. But none of that mattered at the time. I made it into town, did some shopping, met up with my roommates for dinner, and generally had a good time until I noticed the sun was setting. So I bid my adieus, hopped on my bike, and pedaled off into the sunset. At first, I did all right, but that aforementioned incline wore me down. By the time I reached the last leg of my journey, it was pitch black, and I was walking my bike, at which point the road faced me with a choice. To my left was the regular road, which was better lit, but also a longer trek to get to the townhouse row I occupied. To my right was my more regular route to and from town. I drove it every day, and had used it to come into town that very day, in fact. It was heavily wooded and unlit, but featured a shorter route, albeit with a steeper hill. I figured since I was already walking, I might as well just take the shorter, familiar path. So I turned my bike's headlamp on and headed into the even greater darkness of the road through the woods. All went well for a bit. I trudged along and cursed myself for being so stupid and overconfident with my bike. Then I heard it. Footsteps off to my right side in the woodland. I stood still, and they stopped abruptly. There in the blackness, I debated what it might be. But as a veteran of the woods, I hoped it was just local wildlife, and continued on. The footsteps started up again. They stopped when I stopped, just a hint later. I started and stopped once more, to be sure I wasn't hearing things. This last time, the steps continued for a solid 10 seconds after I'd stopped, making me sure something, or someone, was out there. I still don't know what, though I logically leaned towards humans, as the gait sounded bipedal and more precise than a quadruped. With this in mind, I weighed my options. If I dropped the bike and ran towards home, it would be far too easy to catch me. The same was true, even if I ran back towards town. I was not in any way prepared for a chase, and I didn't want to initiate one. My mind strayed to the utility knife I always carry in my purse, but I shoved that thought aside. I have enough martial arts training to know the knife was a bad idea, and I was more comfortable taking whoever or whatever was out there bare-handed, rather than escalating things with the blade. Instead, I called my roommate, who was still in town, gave her my location, and told her what was happening. She told me she'd be here in 10 minutes. I hung up and started walking again. The footsteps started up too, this time faster and out of sync with mine. And that's when I got mad. I have a weird thing where fear makes me angry and hostile, and being stalked through the woods had officially punched my buttons from terrified to murderous. So I turned to the woods and roared with a voice I didn't know I had. "How about you come on out and face me, you piece of shit? I'll rip your stomach open and wear your intestines for a necklace." For the life of me, I don't know where I got the guts or the words for that. It might well have been a bad move, but the woods were rather abruptly quiet, and nothing came at me. I stayed still, staring hard, ready to beat the shit out of anything that moved. Nothing did. Then my roomie came on scene, her headlights almost blinding me as she turned the curve to where I was. I tossed my bike in her car, and we hauled ass homeward. I collapsed once I got home, vomited from pure nerves, and finally fell asleep around 3 a.m. And that's my story. I'm not sure of much, I will grant you. Was it a person? An animal? I feel compelled to lean towards the former, if for no better reason than because it sounded like a person walking. And what animal would be so precise in stalking and winding me up? But who knows? Maybe I just scared the shit out of some poor porcupine. Regardless, I'd rather not encounter it again. Alright, so I'll try to keep the backstory as short as possible. A couple years ago, my living situation evaporated faster than I had expected it to, and I had to pack all my possessions into my car and leave where I was living. There was going to be a short stretch of time where I had next to no money, certainly not enough for a week or two of $80 a night motel fees, a little over $100 all in. So I bought a cheap tent and other similarly crappy camping equipment and some ramen, and I decided I would crash in the woods. That way I could leave my car full of my stuff and still have a place to sleep. I lived in a fairly forested area at the time, and since I grew up in the area and partied out in the woods a lot in high school, I knew a decent amount of trails and discreet hiding places not far from said trails. So I brought my gear out to a very small mountain, and since it was going to rain that night, I hunted around for a nice place to set up. Being a mountain, I couldn't just find high ground, but I did find this nice little plateau that projected a few hundred feet from the nearest slope before falling off, and by my best judgment, it seemed as safe a place as any. Well, it turns out my judgment sucks. Not only was the place right in the path of the rain, but all of the water from above had slooshed into an impromptu stream whose course ran right through my tent. I woke up at maybe 2 a.m. to find my sleeping bag half immersed in water and all of my possessions soaked through. Both my phone and flashlight were ruined, so I had no source of light. Despite the lack of illumination, I knew I had to get back to my car because I was freezing cold. Since my clothes were literally soaked through, I decided to leave them and embarked wearing nothing but my boxers. My wallet was ruined too, so I didn't bring it. I quickly realized that I wasn't going to be able to find the trail, so I went back and took my machete so I could hack through the brush. Now, most of you can probably see where things are going, but I would remind you that you are sitting someplace warm and reasonably safe. If you want to put yourself into my frame of mind, think of those cold winter days when you go outside and your stream of consciousness transforms from normal thoughts into an endless stream of fuck, and add a bunch of your possessions being ruined to the mix. So I faced the general direction of my car and just started walking, angrily chopping at anything that happened to block my path. Eventually, after much effort, I see an end to the tree line ahead of me. I walk out and realize that I'm in somebody's backyard. Worse, however, is the fact that said backyard had a screened-in porch with a small table lamp, and standing on that porch is a woman smoking a cigarette. Now really picture this scene in your head. You can click my profile if you want to see what I look like. Now imagine that image, soaking wet, walking into your backyard half naked and enraged, swinging a machete around like a madman. The porch lights went off, and I immediately went into, I'm definitely going to get arrested mode. I hustled out to the street and ran towards my car. then spent the next hour huddled in a ball on the seat, just waiting for the flashing blue lights to come up behind me. They never did, however. I have no idea what that woman thought when she saw me, but it can't have been good. I almost want to go over there and apologize for scaring her, but I'm guessing she doesn't want to meet. I, male, was 9 when this happened. My sister, my dad, my stepmom, and I were at a place called Palmetto Island. It was a camping resort where you just pull up with a tent or camper and just stay there for the weekend or so. We were in a camper. Before I get into the actual story, I should set the scene. Palmetto Island wasn't really an island in the traditional sense. It was completely surrounded by palm trees and vegetation, except for the road in and out. There were roads in the resort, but they were only for golf carts and other smaller vehicles. The whole place was also dense with palm trees and vegetation. If you weren't on the road, in a campsite, or one of the recreational areas, you would be in a forest. Now, for the actual story. We, my family, were all hanging out at one of the playgrounds. I had made a new friend who I was playing with. At some point, the rest of my family had left me to play with my new friend, until eventually he left too. I was there alone, and the sun was beginning to set. This wasn't the first time we'd been to Palmetto Island, and I had, at the time, known it pretty well. I had assumed that the walk back to our campground would be short. However, at that point, I had gotten turned around and ended up in an area where you would launch boats into the water to go fishing. There was a group of people there, and I asked them for directions. Now, I wasn't completely brain dead, so I lied and said the number of our campsite was about 10 sites down from our actual campsite. They pointed me in the right direction, and I started walking. Now, I hadn't known this at the time, but my family had realized that I was no longer at the playground and started driving around in our golf carts and another one that they had rented. If they hadn't, I probably wouldn't be telling this story. As I'm walking towards our campsite, a car pulls up beside me, and one of the people I had asked for directions rolls down the window. Keep in mind, I'd been walking for about an hour or two in total. He offers me a ride and tells me to ride in the front seat. Me, tired and weary from walking, accepts and gets in the car. I know now that's something you should never do. We're driving in the right direction until he passes the entrance to the campsites, at which point I know something is wrong. I tell him he passed it, and he doesn't respond. By some stroke of divine luck, I see my dad in a golf cart driving the opposite direction as us, and I start yelling and waving at him. He pulls up in front of the car and stops, and so does the guy driving. I use the manual unlock in the car door and run to my dad, who has his concealed carry drawn on the guy as soon as I'm out of the way. He calls the police and holds the guy at gunpoint until they get there and arrest him. I'm only now telling this story because I found out last week that this guy and his whole family had done this before and that they had gotten away with it. I try not to think about what would have happened to me had my dad not shown up when he did. Creepy family that tried to kidnap me. Let's not meet. Hi, lovely friends. Before the video ends, I just wanted to thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. Please like and comment if you enjoyed. It really helps me. I hope that you're doing well. I appreciate you. Please stay safe and sweet dreams.